became clear to me. Jesus gave me a directive, stop it. So now we get to this George Floyd, we get to this summer stuff, and I'm like, people around me like, why aren't you talking about this?
Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to the Under God podcast. My name is Stephen Martin, and once again, I am joined by Pastor Nathan Brown. Pastor Nate, nice to see you. Not brain. You do have a good brain, but Nathan Brown, thank you for being here.
It's nice to meet you.
Hey. So we are continuing really a conversation that we started. Can you believe it's already been 6 episodes? This is the 7th episode where we're taking a look at your journey through the lens of this like woke mirage. Yeah. Kind of your journey starting out as a believer, all of this racial intersectionality stuff starts kind of coming in. And what I want to do is I want to just jump back into that conversation in today's episode. We're going to be talking about where faith really meets this worldly secular idea of intersectionality, how it weaves through. In this part of your journey, what was happening in the conversations you were happening in your church as it relates to, you started kind of seeing them push this intersectional, dialogue?
Yeah. So first of all, with intersectionality, I guess let's talk about what that is. Yeah, let's define it. So, what that really is referring to is where people have points of intersecting oppression, and so sort of the more points of oppression you have.
So it's still oppressed oppressor. It's still this Marxist construct.
It is a Marxist construct.
But then they're just stacking how much they're oppressed and kind of like the oppression Olympics.
Yeah,
kind of competing
a little bit.
Okay. What would be an example?
I've never heard it said that way.
What would be an example of intersectionality in that paradigm?
So let's start where there's allegedly no points of oppression, and that would be you and me. So many people would say we shouldn't even be talking about this conversation.
We're white, we're male, we have nothing to say.
We're white, we're male, we're Christians, which is in this country they would say is a privilege, and we're also straight. And so we are what they would call the norm, the baseline culture, where we have no oppression whatsoever, and we have all of the privilege. Once you begin to move away from us, you gain oppression points. So if you're a female who's white, who's Christian, who is heterosexual, you have one point of oppression, and that's that you're a female. Now, if we move another step away where you are a person of color who is also a female, now you've got, I'm a black female, 2 points of oppression. I'm a Christian heterosexual, 2 points of privilege, but you've got 2 now points of oppression. And these things begin to stack. And this is why you saw and still see in culture, this has been tamped down a little bit just since the election of Donald Trump and all of that. But don't think this has gone away. Somebody asked me, by the way, just a little sidebar, don't you feel like you're a little late on this conversation? Like you should have been talking about this before Trump got into office? No, because this stuff is still happening in academia, in the workplace, in corporations.
Well, Harvard just let go $2.5 billion because they're saying, I'm not stopping this DEI stuff. I'm not stopping it. We're going to continue to do it.
They're going to keep on doing it. And Trump, for better or for worse in the Trump administration, the only thing he's doing is buying us time. So this is time to continue to learn how to think about this stuff. But a lot of people don't even understand this work. So this is why you get like the people who get the most attention are, if you're a person of color, you also are on some sexual spectrum or trans or, something in the LGBTQIA plus, alphabet soup of sexuality. And then if you've got that, and then you add in a gender piece to it. So this is why, you're black, transvestite, kind of non-binary, whatever, anybody in that kind of place, they have the most points of intersecting oppression. They're the most oppressed people. Therefore, they should get the most elevation. And then the other thing that happens that I started to realize, and we'll kind of talk through the process of this, but what you're really seeing is like this new form of Gnosticism.
So define that, because you make a statement, ethnic Gnosticism.
Yeah, we'll talk about in the book ethnic Gnosticism, but really it's even more than that. But ethnic Gnosticism is this: that if your ethnicity and your culture has more points of oppression, then you are closer to what is really true. So people would say that because you and I have no oppression in our lives, which is not true, by the way, but that's the claim. then we can't even really access what is true because we can't see it. We're blinded by privilege to be able to see what is true. So in this sort of weird Marxist, culturally Marxist worldview, the more points of intersecting oppression you have, the more access to truth you have. And then they get to tell us what is true, and we're supposed to check our brain at the doors and just believe them.
So again, we're moving from Jesus says, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. And there's this counterfeit. And it's interesting because your story is centered in, you're a pastor on staff at a church, you're walking through other believers, all of this cultural stuff's going around. As we were talking earlier, we kind of pulled out 3 kind of pivotal moments I want to jump into. Yeah. And as all of this is kind of seeding, we've talked about it in different episodes, there are several pivotal moments in your journey. The first one being the death of Breonna Taylor.
Yeah. So this was a big deal because people have asked me who
give us like a landscape. Remind our
Yeah, the landscape is that I'm in this place where I've been hearing a lot of stories from people about how they're experiencing oppression and how racism is still alive and well, and being try to convince me of structural racism, systemic racism, legalized racism, and all of which, as I pressed into, I've found to be on shaky ground at best. And so I'm in this place, though, where I'm still trying to advocate for the things that my friends are telling me are affecting their lives. And again, this is all on a spectrum, and it's a nuanced conversation. And there are some things that are true and that are real and that really happen, and real stories. And then there's broader narratives that you're asked to sort of believe, different kinds of truths that you're supposed to take on. And I had been in a position where I was trying to advocate for these positions and for my friends. And during this time, there was a police shooting in Kentucky, and a girl by the name of Breonna Taylor was killed. And I immediately heard the narrative that Breonna Taylor was killed as a black female in her bed, sleeping at night, by these racist police. That was the narrative.
In Kentucky.
In Kentucky, yeah. And immediately there's news articles about this. So this is why you got to be careful, because I'm being sent. Did you see this? Did you see this?
This is a pro tip too. Anytime something happens right away and everyone wants to push a narrative, you should always have your antennas up going, wait a minute, stop. Just let a little bit of time pass before you start making judgments. This is a big deal even in the church and with believers. This is a really, really big deal. Just because somebody says something happened a certain way, time tells. And
right.
There's a lot of things you can't see, even though the video may seem clear or the audio may seem obvious. It's just so much more complicated.
It's more complicated, but this is a lesson that I've had to learn the hard way, unfortunately. So I get sent, look at this, and some of it is Facebook posts. Some of it was actually like mainstream media outlets covering this story. And somehow a whisper campaign about what had taken place became the official narrative. And so me wanting to help people who are telling me, you need to help us advocate for these causes, I'm like, man, shoot, this is bad. So I take to social media and I propagate this narrative. And I'm like, this is really bad. Police killing a black lady just sleeping in her bed because they're out of control and there's a problem. And I'm like, it's embarrassing, honestly, for me to even say this, but I posted this. And one day I'm sitting in my office, and this was like maybe within a day or two of when I posted this. A friend of mine who's like a real friend. I mean, I have a real friend, but this is a real friend, comes in. And he asked if he could shut the door. You want to have a shut.
That's a real friend.
Shut the door meeting.
When you said yes, that's how you know it's a real friend.
Yeah, yeah. He comes in. Can I close the door? And he said, hey, can I just tell you? I think you don't know what you're talking about. I think your post, and he used some choice words, is a bunch of bull. And I'm sitting here a little taken back because up to this point, every time I would kind of speak out on these things, it was a lot of like, man, thank you for saying that. We appreciate you doing this. A lot of attaboys. I wasn't doing it for that, but that was just what would happen. And this was really the first time that someone came to me face to face and challenged. And I'm like, well, what do you mean? I posted a news article. What do you mean it's not what happened? He's like, it's not what happened. There's more news articles coming out. Maybe you should have paused.
Wow.
Said what you just said. Maybe you should have waited and did your homework before you rush to judgment and get out here and start saying stuff that's not true.
But what's the truth? And
so he challenges me. He's like, I asked him that. So what was the truth? He said, I think you should find it. And you should decide if you really want to post this or not, And he said, I respect you, but this is not respectable, what you just did. I mean, this is a hard conversation, you know, and I'm sitting here like thinking I'm doing something good. And then my friend is challenging me. And so I go and I start to do some more investigation, and I start to read more about this and start to try to understand what really happened.
Time starts to
pass. And basically the story of her laying in bed being asleep wasn't even true. All the police reports come out and body cams and all this stuff. And the police had made some mistakes that night. They did some things that probably aren't good, like a no-knock warrant, and they've now changed that. But basically what happened was the police confronted a drug dealer in an apartment complex. They did have a warrant. It was a no-knock warrant. It was legal at that time. It's not legal now to do what they did. They made changes. That's cool. We should do that. But they go to this door. A guy doesn't know, the claim is he doesn't know the police, thinks it's somebody trying to break in, and he takes a shot and he shoots at the police. Well, the police shoot back. And what we find out later is that Breonna Taylor was not in bed. She was in the hallway behind her drug dealing boyfriend, who shot at the police. The police returned fire, and she's caught up and killed in the process. Now, again,
which in and of itself is a terrible thing.
It's a terrible thing.
Anytime somebody loses their life, especially somebody that's, you know, with somebody that's doing that. But, you know, it's one of those things. It wasn't the original narrative. And I think that it's interesting how the enemy works. And I love your story because you're helping people see how this happens slowly over time and then all at once. It's like you come to this place where you're like, man, I know exactly what happened. And it's God's grace that you had a friend that came and said, hey, wait for the details to come out. You see the details, and the facts completely debunk any of the previous narratives.
Yeah, totally does. And so I remember going through this, and I just sat there, and man, I just felt stupid. You know, I thought, what are you doing? And I'm not a dumb person. I'm not the smartest guy in the room, but I'm usually not on the other end of that spectrum either. And I just thought, like, I just sat there and I started to think, like, how did I get to this where I rushed to judgment? I'm condemning. And by the way, there's no proof of any of this having any racial motivation either. Like, even with what the police did wrong, there's no proof of racial motivation. And yet I had been trained to think at this point that if the police were involved, racism was involved.
Wow. Which is a form of unjust judgment.
It is actually an unjust. I'm so glad you said that. Like, I don't even have that in my notes for today, but that's true. And so now it's like, whoa, in the name of love, in the name of trying to be a good friend, I'm literally sinning. Like, I'm saying things that aren't true. I'm holding on to beliefs that are not true. And because something may be true in one circumstance doesn't mean it's true for all circumstances. And yet I had come to that conclusion. So I had blasted online these racist police killing unarmed black people for no good reason while they're just sleeping in their bed.
Well, I think your friend, what a great friend, but it starts this process. And it's interesting how God works, because these pivotal moments, we call them pivotal because they challenge us in a way. And so you're in this is the first thing that happened. And not too much later, we get the killing, the killing of George Floyd.
Yeah.
In police custody. Maybe talk a little about that moment. So you're walking through what happened. I'm guessing you're probably a little bit slower maybe in this one.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Yeah, I was for sure a little slower on this one. And so this occurred not long after the Breonna Taylor's death. We have George Floyd dying. And of course, this is a case
which blew up all of culture.
Everybody,
even me, being, outside of Fort Hood pastoring. I mean, this was a big deal.
Huge deal. This really is the incident that was the shot heard around the world for the whole idea of racism and policing. And it had been kind of conversations, around, and there had been stuff that was happening. Black Lives Matter was a thing, but yeah, it's like everything that had been happening was kindling, was fuel. And then to your point, the match comes. So this, what happened here, I actually was a little bit slower, but everybody around me was not. And so they jumped right to it. And this time we got video right away. And the video looked a little rough. I mean,
it did.
What did you think? I'm curious what you thought when you saw it.
I remember seeing the video, and I remember thinking to myself, first of all, my mind, I hadn't been in the same kind of environment you had, but I had seen the video. Man, I was like, this is really, really bad. If this happened like this is certainly criminal negligence on the part of the police officers dealing with this situation. And then you start hearing all the pieces, and I knew a little bit more to pause and to wait. In Minneapolis, that's a rough city. Like, I just know that's a rough city in terms of just crime. And so I waited a little bit, but man, I'm just looking at that video, I actually kind of jumped quick to be like, hey, no, this has to be dealt with. No, I obviously didn't jump on the, hey, let's abolish the police. And I didn't look at this one group of officers and think to myself they represented all of America. I didn't have any of those narratives, but I was certainly quick to judge them.
Yeah.
I was certainly quick to go, hey, if that's the case, man, this is crazy.
Yeah.
But again, more time.
Yeah.
More space to be able to see what actually happened gave a different picture.
Yeah. So I did kind of sit back on this one, and man, I got a lot of flack for it. Why aren't you? Because now it's so weird.
Now you're like the white heterosexual male ally, right?
Yeah.
What do they call it? Ally.
Yeah. Ally, advocate, accomplice, all this. So all the stuff we talked about in the previous episode. But I am now on kind of a different trending slide than all the rest of culture. So all the rest of culture is now starting to catch up in 2020 to where I was like in 2014, 2015, when I started in this direction. And so I'm kind of 5 years slow rolling where I'm like getting to this point, and I've now hit where I just got challenged on another event, and I'm a little bit in like retreat mode. I'm like, I don't want to be an idiot, but everybody else, I remember this was when they did it was not long after this when they did the black square on social media, and like everybody posted a black square and on that day. And I remember thinking like,
and the narrative was quick. I mean, cause now you have like a video, it's not like waiting for body cam. There was like this kind of bystander video. And man, I mean, just what you saw on that video just fit. And I think a lot of people who maybe weren't on that journey with you, maybe were thinking this is kind of crazy. How we're kind of starting to go,
yeah,
man, like that's bad.
So yeah, so all the activists will come and go, we've been talking about this forever, this, and all of a sudden you're right back to Michael Brown. All the stories come back to life, and then they go, and this is the proof. And at this point, we're in 2020. So remember what's going on at this point.
Yeah. COVID shut down the nation.
Is shut down.
Summer of Love. This sparks riots and protests all over the city. They said billions of dollars in damages. I mean, it was literally, it set the nation on fire.
Yeah, and the country was a powder keg because our ridiculous government at that time had us all cooped up, wearing masks. I'm just making up words.
Mask guy.
Nathan Brain and maskus. So we're all dehumanizing each other. We're covering our faces. We are isolated. A lot of people, depression is on the rise because people,
all we're doing is looking at screens,
screen time. And you're not getting the sunshine. You're not getting human interaction. And, that just feeds a lot of negativity inside of people. So we've now been for 3 months in this heightened state of isolation and fear and what's going to happen. And then this happens and everything blows up. And I'm sitting here having just gotten confronted going, I don't know if this is what everybody says it is. And George Floyd had some Houston connections too. And I knew some people that knew him as Big Floyd. And so I'm like 2 degrees of separation away.
He wasn't a good guy.
And
he was a criminal.
He was, but what I'm hearing is the good stuff,
Yeah.
And of course that's what the nation begins to hear. And listen, just because someone commits a crime, if it's not a crime worthy of death, they don't deserve death.
Sure.
Just because he's a criminal doesn't necessarily mean they need to die. But in this situation, everything blows up. But I'm sitting back and I'm going, I don't know. It looks like the cop is a little rough on him, but I don't know how this is race related. We've got a black officer, an Asian officer, and a white officer all involved in this thing. And they're dealing with a call. And they dealt with it according to the policies. And people say, well, they need to change the policies, and they did. But this sparks something where this is now the proof. This is the proof for all of America that all of policing is racist. And we need to defund the police.
Spark movements all over the country.
Got to change everything.
Communities are still reeling from this because once you remove the police, the criminals come in and they know where to go and who to take advantage of. And this starts happening. You start seeing Portland. You start seeing Seattle. You start seeing just all of these crazy things
everywhere. And then we have like nationally known politicians coming and starting GoFundMes to pay not for the damages done to buildings, but to bail out people
Yeah,
who were
Kamala
getting
Harris
arrested.
is her name.
Yeah,
Yeah,
she wasn't the only one. I mean, we could say her name.
She celebrated it. She was like,
her name, and
let's do that.
Tim Walz, and who's there in the middle of this, and he's like, oh yeah, let's decriminalize everything, and police are bad, blah, 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 blah. But anyway, so back to my journey. This actually was like, while everyone else lit up, I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't think this is what everybody's saying it is. Now imagine that. I'm like, I gone from being the guy who's talking about everything, and now we reach this moment where everybody else wants to talk about it, and I'm sitting back going, I think you guys are drinking the Kool-Aid I just spit out. Like, just spit out.
It reminds me when Jesus says, woe when everyone speaks well of you. I think there is like this self-fulfilling narrative that you get yourself in this echo chamber where you're constantly, I think it's bad on both sides. I think you predominantly see it on the left. You just do. You see they only have those friends, they only think those things, and it just anything that they see is through that filter. Going back to this, that it wasn't all the facts. Things began to come out. And then conveniently, I noticed this, the narrative had already taken place. Even as things began to come out, like you start to see even mainstream media networks, people just completely burying it and really railroading these officers. I mean, I saw that right away.
Yeah. And I don't know how those guys could have possibly gotten a fair trial. I mean,
they did.
And I don't want to re-adjudicate that. I'm not an expert on it.
They're working on re-adjudicating it.
And maybe they should, if nothing else, because I don't know how you get a fair trial in that environment. I mean, you want to get, you want to move towards justice quickly, and you don't want to have unnecessary time wasted. But man, things were so crazy. I don't know how you get that. So, but this thing now has come, and and the narrative's had a little bit of a paralyzing effect on the church, because especially the church that I was a part of, there was sort of an expectation that you take on this narrative that's given to you. But then other people are like, well, I don't know. And I found myself in this weird place. And what actually ended up happening was, and again, you push back on me a little bit privately, but like I do think the intentions were always good in all of this. But then the church,
hell is paved with good intentions.
Yeah, the road to hell is paved.
The road to hell is paved with good intentions.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true.
It's like I always say this: we always judge ourselves. We judge everyone else by their actions, but ourselves by our intentions. And that's always something, by the way, pro tip. Sin always helps you see the best in yourself and the worst in everyone else.
Yeah.
And it's the gospel that flips that. It's like we want to see the worst in those people, but really, what about our own, like, are we actually seeing that clearly ourselves? So anyways.
So on the heels of that, the church that I was in decided to do a police forum. And so they invited 5 police chiefs from the Austin area to come and talk about policing. And I thought, man, this is like, I don't know about this, and I'm not sure what's going to happen. And I was not a part of this. I had just kind of taken a step back from the ministry that I had been a part of, where we were trying to foster conversations across diverse lines of people. And I had just said, like, I don't know if this is a good idea. And then this police forum happened. And when the police forum was put together and organized, the idea was that 2 of the pastors on staff of the church would interview these police and just hear from them about what's going on and talk about, things that they're learning.
Or was it just about Austin?
No, it's in the Austin area. So like Pflugerville, Round Rock, Austin, Leander, Cedar Park, these kind of communities are bringing in those police chiefs to talk about. And I'm a little bit like feeling for these police chiefs, because the whole country is like all of a sudden anti-police, like in this moment. But I'm sitting at home watching this because it was a broadcast. We couldn't meet together because this is COVID. The church was closed, everything. So this is all happening live stream. And there was a community organizer named Sharonda Robinson who was invited to be a part of the conversation. As I'm watching, she actually kind of, my opinion, looking back.
When you say community organizer, sorry, my
yeah, I know your antenna should go off.
What does that mean?
So,
I think communist, Marxist, socialist, any combination of all those.
Unfortunately, that seems to be the case. You can organize the community, a lot of things, but it seems to be the case. I didn't know this woman; she was not a part of our church. And I'm sitting here watching this video that's put out on our church's YouTube page. And I'm watching the pastors from our church, who I didn't necessarily agree with everything on, but I've been on this journey with, still friends of mine. I'm thinking, well, okay, they'll be fair and judicious. But this lady doesn't go to our church, like took over the whole thing. And she's now basically becomes the moderator. And it turned into an attack the police chief session for like an hour. And I'm sitting here and I'm just like, man, I'm so uncomfortable. I'm like, what is happening? What's going on? and I don't want to get too into the weeds and be too uncovering, but this was something that really happened, and it all happened while I'm trying to take a step back and just to reevaluate. Like, I hadn't even really like changed positions or opinions on anything. I'm just like trying to breathe and let my eyes settle. You know, sometimes you walk in and there's fog in the air, and you're like, I just want to make sure I'm seeing clearly before I do anything. And so I had laid out of this. I'm not involved in it. And then people are talking about it and asking me what I think. And I felt a little stuck because what I thought wasn't really good. You know, I thought this is not good. Like, why are we attacking the people who are charged with keeping our community safe? It all felt very weird. But what I noticed in the outflow of all of this, these three things happen. I started to realize that while diversity was a priority, if it was a certain kind of diversity, if it was diversity of skin color, if it was diversity of ethnic origin, if it was the diversity of nationality, those are things that we should go after, that we should celebrate, that we should make a big deal about. But if it was a diversity of thought or diversity of opinion, that diversity wasn't particularly wanted.
They were demanding uniformity.
It was actually
that's ideology.
It's an ideological uniformity that was being pursued in the name of diversity.
This is again where, and I'm going to tell you, like, Satan does this. He's a player on words. He'll change words, and leftists do this a ton too. I mean, there's nothing more Luciferian than did God really say?
Yeah,
it's just, he'll start to mess with words, and so we see this idea of diversity. That doesn't mean what people think it means when you think of it. I think it means like different ideas, different perspectives. And yeah, maybe it's a different race if you come from a different family or community, but that's a perspective. This wasn't about that. This was about immutable characteristics and intersectionality. I mean, it was like, what's the degree? And then everything's pushing this way. So you're experiencing this. You're starting to have conversations. Tell more about how you're moving through this.
Well, honestly, most of my conversations were happening with the Lord at this point, because I was a little bit nervous to talk to anybody, even to process, because I didn't know where it would go. And I honestly, like, here's what happens when you realize that you're wrong. And we can all have the capacity to be wrong. By the way, if you're listening to this podcast and you think that you can't be wrong, you're already wrong, right? And there's a level of, okay, I want to be open-minded in the sense that I want to be open to new information that I can then take in and adjudicate. But I kind of realized, and again, it's a little embarrassing to say, but I think that my open-mindedness had got to the point where I had just let people pour stuff in. But I didn't, what I knew enough at this point was that I didn't want to overreact and go the other direction and then just immediately allow other things to be poured in. This really became a highly spiritual moment for me, where I just realized, like, I've got to get alone with God. I've got to do some serious soul searching. I've got to make sure that I can pick out the voice of the Lord in the midst of all these other loud voices and expectations and things I thought I needed to do and other people expected me to do. And there's a lot of expectations around right after George Floyd, man. You got to do this, you got to say that. And I'm like, actually, I'm being quiet. And this is, I've only told this story to a few people. But around this same time, I had what I really believe was a vision from the Lord. As we get Christianity is a little mystical, so I'll share a little bit of a mystical story with you. I was out walking my dog, and this was all right in this same time. I think this was actually between between the Breonna Taylor and the George Floyd thing, where I was processing and praying. But I was walking, and I. All of a sudden, I see like this barrel, like this metal barrel, and I have a bag of marbles in my hands. And as I'm sitting here with this bag of marbles, it was like I was joined by the Lord, and He told me, throw one. And so I take a marble out of the bag and I throw it into this metal barrel. And you can imagine the noise that would make. Ding, ding, clink, clink, clink. It's really loud. And all of a sudden, when that happened, this is weird. It's like I watched a movie, but it's all happening around me like it's real. There's all these people suddenly around, and they all stop and look to see where the sound's coming from. So imagine if there's all these people and all of a sudden there's a noise. And then after it stops, they start talking amongst themselves again. And then He says, do it again, throw another one. And I throw it in there, and it makes a lot of noise, and people turn and they look. And then they're looking at me like, oh, you did that. Yeah. And then they go back to what they're doing, and it happens a third time. Throw it in there. I throw it in. And everyone, now they turn, and now everyone has a bag of marbles. And everyone begins to throw their marbles into that big metal barrel. And then while I'm watching, and now it's like crazy loud. It's like, noise, banging, metal sounds. And then the Lord looks at me and says, throw another one. So I throw it. And he says, could you hear that?
Wow.
And I'm like, can I hear what? Throw another one. Can you hear it? And Stephen, this is one of the strangest, scariest moments of my life because I feel like I'm face to face with Jesus. He says, can you hear it? And I said, no. And he looks me in the eyes and says, stop it. And I knew in that moment that he was talking about the activism that I had been doing on social media, that not only had I been creating noise and causing people to look at stuff, influencing, but also I had found myself in an environment where everyone was doing the same thing. And now whether what I was doing was right or wrong, what I was saying was right or wrong, it all had become collective noise. And because of the noise, I couldn't hear his voice. I couldn't hear what he was saying because there was so much noise. And the noise wasn't going to stop, but my contribution to it became clear to me. Jesus gave me a directive, stop it. So now we get to this George Floyd. We get to this summer stuff. And I'm like, people around me like, why aren't you talking about this? And I have to tell them, because Jesus told me not to. And that's the true answer. He told me not to. But you got to say something. Like you're one of the important voices that people listen to. I don't think they're listening to me. I don't think they're listening to anybody else. And I think my contributions are preventing me from hearing from God. So I'm going to get quiet. I'm going to stop talking about anything.
But by the way,
I need to listen to the Lord.
This is a pattern in Scripture too, and this is very important for those of you that are listening to the story. You know, you want to hear the voice of God. The voice of God's not a bully. He's not a tyrant. He's not going to possess you. You know, we say this regularly, but as was his custom, Jesus rose early in the morning and went to a solitary place to be alone.
Yeah.
It was in these places where, you know, he communed with the Father. And I think it's so interesting. You're in this place where there's dissonance in your mind. There's confusion. By the way, the Bible says the devil is the author of confusion.
Yeah.
This is important. In those moments, what should you do? Should you make that post? Should you just react how you feel? Absolutely not. You should do what you did. And you should say, you know what? There's too much noise here. God can't speak to me here. Remember, what does the Bible say? In Samuel, his voice is still and small.
Still small.
He will not bully you. If he's always talking, but many times the noise around us is so loud. And I love this just as part of your story because it really becomes like each one of these moments were turning points from Breonna Taylor to George Floyd to this police, forum. Now this becomes a moment of the Lord where he's helping you cut through the noise and really, as I look at it today, really setting you up for the incredible things he's doing in your life now. And so anyway, continue that. I couldn't help but stop.
No, it's good.
That's an important thing.
It's good. It's good. And so now immediately it's like all of a sudden people are looking at me like almost like they expected it. The white guy that we thought was with us, we always should have suspected that maybe he wouldn't be with us. He's secretly always been against
inherent
us.
biases.
And I never bought into everything that everyone said, but I bought into a lot. And in this moment where I sat back, this is totally metaphorical, and I don't want anyone to take this as literal, but the experience a little bit where I just got real quiet after I was the one doing all this, I got real quiet and I just started to listen. Have you ever been in an environment, hopefully not too many times, but where everybody's drunk except for you?
Oh, I've been there. Not recently. Okay, not recently, but I've definitely been there.
When you're the DD or you're the guy who just, I'm not going to go where you guys go, there reaches a point where you're like, you feel so alone, even though like you're around all these people because they're all on the same,
yeah.
And me personally,
they're all loud making ruckus. And
I don't even like that feeling of getting there, but everybody's doing their thing and you're the only one and now you're like seeing stuff that you wouldn't see except that you're the only one who's in the place.
Yeah, you're the only sober person saying, and now you're starting to see, oh my gosh, there's like, this is crazy.
So that's a little bit. I'm not saying all the people they were not drunk, but the circle that I was in, they were all having the same conversations, and I just really kind of quietly like backed myself out of the conversation from participating just to listen, to listen to them, but I'm now very intentionally trying to listen to the Lord because He's made clear to me that the noise that was around me and the noise that I contributed to, and even in some ways propagated, He said, all of it is stopping you from hearing my voice. And when this happened, what I began to realize really was the degree of ideological, not theological. Some of it was masked as theological, and I think the intention was that it was theological. But I began to realize the degree of ideological commitments that people around me had made. And I realized that I had done the same thing. But when you make an ideological commitment, period, and then you come across a circumstance, you're pretty much forced to apply your ideological commitment to how you interpret a circumstance. And I realized that's what I had been doing. And when I backed out of that, I realized, whoa, that's what a lot of people around me are doing. This is feel free to interrupt me.
I'll be honest, like I as I hear your story, I think there's also a misorder of voices in your life too, because I think all of us, we have ideologies. We have things that because of our experience, I think there's some truth to that. I think because we are diverse in thought and opinion and experience. And I think this is where you have to understand your theology has to trump any of your ideology.
Has to.
And as you give your life to Christ and you walk with God, you're going to realize that there are ideological things that you believe about sex, about marriage, all kinds of things that are just kind of like these ideas floating out there that you have to bring under your theology. And I think a lot of times what happens, I would actually say a lot of the strongest ideologies, right or left. We're dealing with the left right now, but we've had moments where we've dealt with the right. I don't think it's like a circle. They're right next to each other on their extremes. Their outcomes are almost identical.
Yeah.
But I think what happens is that actually becomes a theology, and it becomes the theology by which you see everything through. And so this is where like you got to be real careful, because if you're having a really hard time, setting your mind on this and then moving it towards God's way, chances are a lot of your ideologies, you've probably made them theology. Mm-hmm. And you've got to allow God to rework that through the truth of his word. And this is what I love about Romans chapter 12, verse 2.
Yeah.
It says like, do not copy the behaviors or customs of this world. The translation says, reject the behaviors and customs of this world.
Yeah.
Right? But let God transform you by changing the way you think. Then you'll learn to know his will, which is good, pleasing, and perfect.
Yeah.
There's a process to Romans 12, too. I've done an episode on it, I know, but I think it's a great opportunity to go. When we stop that process, what happens is all of the world's ideologies will become our theology, and it will become how we live.
Yeah.
But Christ has called us, listen, we have to reject that way of thinking, and it's not going to make us a lot of friends.
No.
Many times. I always joke about the book, the famous book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. I want to write a book that's called How to Lose Friends and Influence People, because that's actually what it means to follow Christ. You have to reject it, and then you have to cooperate with God, which is what you're doing. You're getting to a solitary place. You're starting to realize you're in this bubble, this echo chamber, which we can all find ourselves in any situation, any area of our life. We can always find an excuse to do what we want to do,
right?
And find the right voices. But you're starting to remove yourself from that, and really, you're letting God transform the way you think about that situation.
Yeah.
And this is interesting because you're learning, and this is where I think it's so important for listeners. I'll be honest. There's some things like COVID. I learned during COVID. You had this experience with Black Lives Matters and all this stuff. I've grown up with people from all different kinds of minorities. I grew up in the trailer park, which is not a whole lot different than the inner city,
right?
Other than skin color most of the time. We're pretty much the same culture, the same issues. And so I grew up, I didn't have that issue, but when we got to COVID, I made some big mistakes as a pastor. The worst mistake I've ever made as a pastor of this church is ever past the 15 days to slow the spread, ever shutting down our church. And I even had to go to our church, and it was a process. My wife's a physician. I mean, she thought she could trust all these people. She went to medical school. We're having very fierce conversations in the morning talking about this. I kept the church closed longer than I should have. And it was mostly out of fear, not fear for myself, but fear for people. It doesn't matter. It was an idol. And I wasn't getting to a quiet place and listening to God. I was listening to all these other voices. And it wasn't until Easter Sunday, I'm watching the live stream on Easter Sunday, and I have never felt more convicted in my entire life. Easter Sunday, we were watching on a video. And I mean, the Lord was just like, you're in complete disobedience. Wow. The next week, we just reversed. And I think this is the process of...
That wasn't even that long.
Well, no, it wasn't. But it wasn't. But man, I'm telling you, Easter Sunday was hard for me. And I told our church, I said, and this is the part of learning from, mistakes and being naive and falling for deception. It's like, you have to move from embarrassment to, hey, God will use it. And like today, I told him, I said, I don't care if the Governor Abbott and the Texas National Guard roll up to the front of our building. I will never close our church again. Yeah. That will never happen again. Yeah. And it also, in the midst of some of these maybe like embarrassments where like you fell for something you shouldn't have, God writes a story and solidifies a set of values in you if you'll let him.
Yeah.
And those values are only as strong to the opposition that they've received.
Yeah.
And so God's doing this in your story. I want to talk. So you're working at a church. You're seeing this thing happen in this police forum. You're starting to get alone with God. You're starting to hear the voice of the Lord. Walk us through the rest of the story.
Yeah. So when you mentioned COVID, of course, that's going on at the same time. And one of the things that I also was starting to wrestle with, because, we shut down in March. Now it's June. July is when the forum happens. We're sliding into August. Church is still closed. And I'm like, man, I don't think this is good. We should probably get back together. Church is not Christian programming. It's the people of God coming together, and there's a sacred rhythm into the church of being gathered and scattered and gathered and scattered. And that we have to keep that going, but that's not happening. And so again, all of this is causing me to go just like, God, what are you doing? And I realized in that season that I couldn't participate or really affect or do anything about what was happening on the whole. And God was very intentionally setting me aside to deal with me. And you know what? Sometimes that has to happen. So we move into the fall of that year, and I had a sabbatical that was planned for me to be off work and out of church for the month of October in 2020. Even before COVID and all that was just part of the rhythm. Every 5 years on staff, you take a month off and just, go and rest and recuperate. And it's not a bad idea, not a bad principle, but I think God had that set up for me at the end of this, because I ended up taking a month. I got away. And as you know, I have an uncle in Washington, D.C., and I hadn't seen him in years at that point in time. And I thought, I'm going to go spend some time with him and spend some time alone. And so I went for 10 days to D.C. by myself, stayed at his house, but he's working, and spent time golfing and fishing and praying a lot and just being alone. You and I will do a DC recap here soon, but I went to the monuments by myself, and I just sat and just looked and thought. I just took time just to slow down, to think, to pray, to try to hear the voice of the Lord in the midst of everything that was going on. And during that time, the Lord didn't give me a lot of answers and didn't give me a battle plan to come back. The Lord actually spoke to me and told me, be faithful where you are, but next year will be your last year. And I thought, okay, I'm not sure what that means. What do you mean next year will be your last? That's all I got. And I came back from that sabbatical. I shared with my wife, and I shared with someone else who was a great friend and influence to me in the church. That was one of the only people I was talking to about this, one of our elders there, a good friend of mine, but I was processing some of this with him. And I said, I think next year is going to be my last year. And I hope you don't fire me. I don't have a plan. I'm not, I don't know what's happening. I just think that's what God said. Would you pray with me about what that might mean? And so he said, yeah. But another thing happened that was strange. And I'm glad that the Lord spoke to me, because I knew it was coming. Because I think if I wasn't in the spirit and I was in the flesh, things could have gone really bad there. When I came back from my sabbatical, while I was gone, a lot of things had happened, things I'm not going to talk about on this podcast or publicly, but some things were happening publicly and were being talked about in public meetings about how we needed to make the power structure of the church more equitable. And there was conversations about how there's too many white people in charge and too many white people with loud voices. And we needed to silence some of the voices of some of the white people and elevate some of the voices of people of color and from different backgrounds. And these are like high level conversations happening about restructuring how the church was led, and who had what positions. And it was all about trying to bring equity to the power structures of the church.
There's not a biblical equal outcome. It's not a biblical idea.
This is what I came back from. And I thought, this is a little wild, and I'm not sure what's going to play out here. And some changes were made in January of 2021 to bring different type of leadership in the church and how different people from different backgrounds were represented. And the whole time I'm thinking like, and Stephen, you gotta know, like, I love this. I was a part of this church for 17 years. I found this church when I was like completely broken, gone through the worst season of my whole life. They were like a hospital to me, then like a rehab center, and had become family. And and I loved every person there deeply, but I found myself very disoriented because the voice of God was telling me, stop it. The voice of the Lord started telling me, you have to repent for your participation. I had to have a conversation and with my pastor, my leader, and say, I'm sorry for participating in propagating this. And it was the hardest conversation I've ever had because he felt like it was a good thing we were doing. And I'm feeling like I'm getting whipped by the Lord here, like spanked by God for my part in it. And it just was a very uncomfortable season. And during this time, I'm seeing that there's this thing happening. And you know me, I'm a loyal person. I'm a person of honor. I never wanted to create a problem, but I was realizing that it was going to be hard for me to continue to serve faithfully the vision of the house, which I think if I'm there, that's what I should do. And so we began this process of praying, Lord, what's next? And I'm going through a process of repentance, of actually changing my mind. That's what repentance is, changing my mind, changing how I see things, changing direction while still trying to walk in unity and not be a divisive figure in the church. So I never started to speak out about what I didn't take an opposite approach. I didn't get a megaphone. I just shut up and just listened to the Lord and did what I was supposed to do and talked only with the people that I was personally accountable to in this season. I'll let you go.
I know our plan is to wrap up this podcast, but I think it'd be better if we split it into two. I don't know where we'll decide. But I think it's important to just pause for a moment.
Thank you so much for joining us today on the Under God podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to like and leave us a review. Your support helps us reach more people with our content. You can stay connected with us on True Social, Facebook, Instagram, and Getter. And don't forget to subscribe on Rumble, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and Spotify so you never miss an episode. You can also access show notes and other resources on our website at undergodpodcast.com. See you next time, and remember to think biblically about the things that matter most.